Moving. Okay, so hi everybody. Welcome to this fantastic venue, which might be hard to find, but it's a great venue. So I think I know just about everybody, but just in case and for people watching online, I'm John Phillimore. I'm the Director of the John Curtin Institute of Public Policy, and it's wonderful to have you here, either in person or online, okay? And of course, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to traditional owners and their elders past and present. If you have never been to a Curtin Corner before, and there are at least two people I know who've never been to a Curtin Corner, our speaker and his wife, we have been running these events regularly on a Friday afternoon, I think for probably 20 years. And I've been here 19 years, and I took over this institution of a Friday afternoon Curtin Corner. Of course, they were always held in person until COVID hit, and then we went online. And now they're primarily held online, but every now and then we decide to have it in person, either if we've got a guest speaker here on the campus or just because we feel like it. Because it's nice to get together and meet real people in the flesh, so to speak. So we have speakers from academia, speakers from government, from business, from community groups, or a combination thereof, which is a bit like Amit is today. So it's great to have you here. We are in this venue, this beautiful venue, the Lantern, on the 7th floor of the library. Terrific views out over the trees, because our normal venue, the council chambers, is being renovated for the next 6 or 7 months. So that's why we're here. But it's a great thing. It's a real reward for you finding us. So thanks for being here. We are recording the session, as I mentioned, and we'll upload it to our website soon. So if you do have colleagues who couldn't make it today, please let them know. They will have a second chance. But of course, they won't get to have any food and drinks later, but that's their problem, not ours. And we do have plenty of our past talks on our website. The whole of first semester's talks are on our website, so I urge you to go and have a look at that. So the format for today is I'm going to introduce Amit, who will speak for 30 or 40 minutes, and then my colleague, David Nicola, my new colleague, will facilitate the discussion. David has been at Curtin for a few years, but he joined the JCIPP recently as the Director Global of the JCIPP, with a particular focus on Africa and the Indian Ocean Rim. And he was instrumental, of course, in getting Amit to spend a week at Curtin as a visiting fellow of the JCIPP, including giving today's seminar. And at the end, of course, we'll enjoy some refreshments and continue the conversation more informally. So now I would like to introduce our speaker, Amit Jain. Do I pronounce it Jain or Jain?
Either way, it's fine.
Jain. Amit Jain, who's the inaugural JCIPP Visiting Fellow, and he's an authority on African issues in Southeast Asia. He served as the director of the Nanyang Technical University Singapore Business Foundation, NTU, SBF, Centre for African Studies in Singapore for 5 years, from 2021 until quite recently. And during that time, he established the centre as the foremost think tank on Africa in Southeast Asia. Before his appointment as the director of CAS, Amit ran a private sector practice advising clients and investors on how to navigate frontier markets across the Asia Pacific and Africa, and his work's been published widely and he's been featured in the international press. He has a background in journalism and media, so he's very well published around the place. He's got a degree in international studies, a postgrad diploma in broadcast journalism, and I can't believe the number of places where he's worked on field assignments. Difficult and sometimes unstable frontier markets is a nice way of putting it. So he's worked in Somaliland, Pakistan, PNG, Uganda, Sierra Leone, Myanmar, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Tunisia, Iran, and even North Korea. And he's still alive to tell the tale. So he's done a terrific job. So he's very well travelled, very knowledgeable, and we're very pleased he's made his way to the wild badlands of Curtin University in Perth. So Amit, thank you very much for coming, and we're lovely and really looking forward to what you've got to say.
Thank you for the diffusive introduction, John. It's a high honor and a privilege to be here and to be in front of all of you at this fantastic venue. So what we are going to be talking about here today is to looking at the relationship between Southeast Asia and Africa in particular, but more importantly, what that means for a country like Australia, which is also trying to develop closer partnership with the African continent. The photograph that I've chosen as a starting point is fairly recent. That gentleman there in that picture is the president of Singapore, President Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who was in Tanzania just last month. And the lady there is the president of Tanzania, Samia Suluhu. This visit came. It was to mark 45 years of diplomatic relationship between Singapore and Tanzania. In terms of trade and business, this was largely focused on enhancing that trade and investment between the two countries. Critical areas for Singapore with the East Africa: carbon credits, trade facilitation, and skills development. Carbon credit: Tanzania became the second country in East Africa to sign a carbon credits agreement with Singapore. Singapore has started to impose a carbon tax on its most carbon-emitting companies and wants to establish itself as a major trading hub for carbon credits. It's not alone. There's an African initiative on carbon credits that's going on, but this is something that Singapore certainly sees a lot of interest in. With Tanzania in particular, the relationship is quite old. There's a small community of Bohri Muslims. They come from the eastern Indian state of Gujarat. They established trading links between India and East Africa, between Southeast Asia and East Africa for generations ago. So one particular firm that stands out is called Naman Boy & Sons. That's a trading firm in Singapore that's been trading spices for decades. Since then, the trading relationship between Singapore and East Africa has sort of evolved. Singapore is involved, at least in the case of Tanzania, in its oil and gas sector. There are investments made in the urban planning and even property development. Then we have, these traditional agribusiness firms like Wilmar and others that are heavily invested in East Africa. Also shipping. There's a major shipping liner called the Pacific International Line, PIL, that operates out of East Africa, moving, mostly minerals to China. But what stood out during this particular visit was that for the first time, Singapore is actually negotiating a free trade agreement. Singapore does not have a single free trade agreement with any African countries. It has about half a dozen active BITs, the bilateral investment treaties, but no FTAs. And this FTA is being negotiated not by one single entity, but by the East African community in general. What is the East African community? It's one of the 8 regional economic groups that are in one way or the other, economically integrated. So with the East African community, that would be the first. If it gets signed, it's still under negotiations, then this would be the very first time that EAC, the East African community, has signed a free trade agreement with any country outside Africa. So that would be a big deal if it happens. Get this moving. Sorry. Okay, so why East Africa? It's clear the answer is some answers are pretty obvious. It offers a lucrative market opportunity for a trading nation like Singapore. East Africa has a growing middle class. Its need for urban infrastructure exists. 40% of its population, at least the urban population, lives in informal dwellings, so there is that demand. The digital landscape in East Africa is booming. Its infrastructure is far better than many other parts of the continent, much more integrated. And although Singapore's total bilateral trade is no more than $650 million, it is growing fast. Predominantly, that's with Kenya. But just to give you a sense of where that starting point, how low that starting point is, it's 1/10 of Singapore's trade with Cambodia. So that tells you how much room that there is still to grow. So to facilitate more investment flows, Singapore has been pushing for double tax agreement, avoidance agreements. And they've signed it with 4 African countries, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania. And the bilateral investment treaty that I spoke to you earlier about with 2 East African countries, Rwanda and Kenya. And 2 carbon credit agreements, once again, one with Rwanda that was signed 3 years ago, and now with Tanzania. So let's take a look at some of the key data points why East Africa is attractive. Again, a big common market, over 330 million people. That's almost 23% of Africa. A combined GDP of $440 billion. And this includes one of the biggest economies of the continent, which is Kenya, 141 billion. It's one of the top 10 economies. I'm not including Ethiopia for now, which I will shortly. As I said, the state of infrastructure is much better, much more diversified. So there is a talent pool which is available. There is light manufacturing. There's light manufacturing capacity that exists. And all but 2 EAC states, except for Burundi and Somalia, each of these East African countries are growing faster than what the IMF predicted they will in 2026. So on an average, the region has a GDP growth of 5.7%. It may not look that remarkable, but considering where they're coming from, it's been stable and growing rapidly. So it's quite remarkable. So if it looks even more impressive if you add members of IGAD, that's the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, which includes countries like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan. But if you include all of that, then the population itself becomes a very compelling proposition. 440 million people, GDP jumps to almost $600 billion. Again, in terms of infrastructure and its integration with East Africa, with Ethiopia, certainly it's much better, well connected with a place like Djibouti. 80% of its trade goes out to Djibouti. The port of Djibouti handles more than 80 to 90% of the entire trade in the Horn of Africa. It also includes some of the more fragile countries. That includes the Democratic Republic of Congo. You have conflict in Sudan and South Sudan, and the continuing violence in Somalia. It also includes, the region also includes one of the most isolated African states in the world. Actually, one of the most, it's like the North Korea of Africa. A very isolated country, very hard to get to. Even to this day, they do not allow you to, if you ever go there, you can't get a SIM. If you do, you can't get data. You actually have to go and book yourself in a. You remember the internet cafes? It's still there in a place like Eritrea. But as a place as a place of a future potential, it's remarkable. It has one of the best Art Deco architecture in the world, certainly because the Italians left a lot of architectural legacy there. The best coffee and some of the most historical sites. The first mosque that was created even before the one that was established in Saudi Arabia was in Eritrea, in Massawa. I visited this bottling plant in Kenya. It's in a place called Ruru near Nairobi. Ultra-modern facility managed by Kenyans, 450 bottles of beverage being produced per minute, owned by a Kenyan billionaire, is a Kenyan but of Indian origin, Vimal Shah, and this would not be out of place anywhere in Asia. So when it comes to places like Tanzania and Kenya and the special economic zones, there is a great potential, certainly that investors out of Singapore see as a launchpad to enter the African market. So that's happening. While Kenya is clearly more industrialized and digitally advanced, Another country is catching up, which is Ethiopia. They have an AI institute for the very first time in Africa, something worth looking at. They have laid out their very first their AI policy framework. There are 8 African countries that have AI policy, but in my reckoning, Ethiopia's is the most advanced. Addis Ababa, this is the capital, clean roads, wide roads, very well laid out, very impressive if you're coming in as an outsider. But I do know there is a colleague of John who's done some remarkable work on the displacement of people in this drive towards modernization. That's a cost that developing countries sometimes have to pay, good, bad, ugly, I guess all of that together. Never to have been colonized ever, so they take particular pride in that place. In terms of both, it's also this physical and the spiritual home for African Union. This vision was driven by the former emperor himself, and then carried on subsequently with other leaders. It has also suffered at the hands of one of the most brutal Marxist regimes that Africa has ever seen. So Ethiopia is a fine example. If anyone wants to see how the Asian model of a state-led development, the developmental state, as it were, works in a place like Africa, Ethiopia is a prime example of that. While Kenya has a national champion, Safaricom, everybody knows they introduced something called the M-Pesa or M-Pesa, which was the first time you could transfer money using a mobile phone. And so they were pioneers. Now everybody in the world follows that, but it was Kenya that started it. They certainly take pride in the fact that they've been up ahead on that curve. Ethiopia takes pride in its airlines. Ethiopian Airlines is the only African airline, only one, that connects Southeast Asia to Africa directly. African airline. So yes, Singapore Airlines does fly to South Africa, and I think in the case of Australia, you have the South African Airways, which connects. But the way they are growing, very ambitious, as a landlocked country to become a logistical node, aviation logistical node, Ethiopia looks pretty good. They're also investing in a very massive new airport in a place called Bishoftu. Yeah, but that has nothing to do with Ethiopian Airlines. Boeing is the one that needs to answer for that one, right? True. I mean, that one did. It's been a while. I know. I guess you told me your university policy doesn't allow you to fly Ethiopian Airlines, which is a shame because it's a really good airline. One of the things that Ethiopian Airlines, I mean, I just digress for a moment. One of the things that Ethiopian Airlines did that no other African airlines did was to have invested in its human capital. Instead of having its pilots and staff train overseas, they established an academy at home. And today, they are a Star Alliance partner. So in terms of the quality of the service, second to none. I can vouch for it because I've flown many times. So this one here is a standard gauge electrical commuter railway, which started in Tanzania in 2024. Connects Dar es Salaam to an industrial town called Dodoma. And now Kenya is planning to extend its own standard gauge railway tour. So little by little, step by step, the quality of infrastructure, East Africa is getting integrated both physically and financially and through infrastructure improvements and so on. And better rail connectivity, better digital connectivity. And that makes it all the more attractive. If that wasn't all, East Africa also holds vast amount of reserves of high-grade copper, cobalt, graphite, rare earth metals, everything that is essential for the world to make a green transition. And the region, particularly around the Great Lakes area, holds titanium as well. So Tanzania, Ethiopia, major gold producers. Kenya extracts a large amount of soda ash. Tanzania is developing a massive multi-billion-dollar LNG, liquefied natural gas project. The first oil refinery in East Africa, major oil refinery, has just been announced by the Dangote Group of Nigeria. That will be the second big refinery coming up. If that gets going, it'll take some time to get established. The reliance for refined fuel, oil, away from the Middle East, then East Africa will become a major node in that sense, and somewhat away from the troubles of the world. So that's coming up, and so these data points that I'm trying to show you is to highlight, is to underscore the economic significance of East Africa. That's me on EV, on an electric bike called Spyro. I test drove this one. It's actually produced, manufactured, and put together in Kenya and a few other places. So this, if you look at e-mobility, for example, Africa, typically spends about $150 billion every year on refined fuel, most of it which it imports. Now that's a big drain on foreign exchange. Switching to EV for many countries would make sense. At this point, EV only accounts for about 1% of a $30 billion market, estimated market, but it's growing pretty rapidly. And countries like Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, and others have rolled out policies and incentives for people to make the switch. In the case of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, now you can't buy a combustible engine car at all. They're completely banned it, starting by the directive to the government agencies and slowly taking it elsewhere. So they're building out that infrastructure in Addis, certainly. In places like Rwanda, you can see battery swap stations. So Spyro, what it has done is it has deployed about 2,500 battery swap stations, but growing rapidly. They have, in fact, one massive funding, $250 million funding. They've raised it to spread EV, to make EV bikes popular across East Africa. So that's one area of emerging tech. Geothermal, the Rift Valley is a very unique geography. Which is why a large part of Kenya's power comes from geothermal energy. In the case of Rwanda, one of the cheapest electricity anywhere in the world, largely renewable because they have a massive hydroelectric dam called GERD. And that's attracting a lot of industrial investments, particularly, ironically, the data centers. So Africa's data centers are getting established. Ethiopia becomes a very attractive place. In Somalia and Somaliland, you have these small-scale rooftop power booming. By the way, all these photographs taken by yours truly during my travels. So Hagiza was entirely powered by rooftop solar. You have hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs selling cheap Chinese kits. It's a real market out there. And there's a whole supply chain that has emerged, including some engineering, some domestic engineering as well. There are lots and lots of self-taught engineers in a place like Somalia and Somaliland. I've spoken a lot about Singapore. Let me take a few minutes to tell you what other Southeast Asian countries are doing. Uganda is wooing investments from Malaysia. Trade between the two has crossed $350 billion. There was a big forum. I do not know if Ida, you had a chance to attend. This is the Pearl of Africa Business Forum and Expo in KL, where a lot of spotlight was put on agriculture, tourism, oil and gas, manufacturing, and technology. So this is Opal, which is the Oil Palm Uganda Limited joint venture between that Kenyan firm, Bidco, and a Singapore-based palm oil conglomerate called Wilmar. This was taken in 2024. And this oil plantation this is a place called Kalangala, which is located on a fantastic, beautiful island on Lake Victoria. This was once a site of thick forest, and the the CC fly, which was, which has known to, be a bugbear of what does it carry? I can't remember, John. It carries some kind of a sleeping sickness. Yes, exactly. Which some people say is responsible for the low population growth in sub-Saharan Africa. But today, this place is a thriving fishing and tourism center, one second, just give me a second. Yeah, there we go. So palm oil produced in Uganda caters largely to the East African market, but the demand is continuing to grow. So Africa has now become one of the biggest importers of palm oil from Malaysia and Indonesia. 3.9 million tons from Malaysia, and about the same from Indonesia. So this particular crop has become one of the strongest links between Southeast Asia and East Africa, and the sector is growing. With Indonesia and East African community is an interesting story. The total bilateral trade is about $714 million, of course, largely in Indonesia's favor. But it's an irony because most of these exports from Indonesia is of palm oil. And the irony, why I say the irony is that the palm oil industry, the know-how, Indonesia and Malaysia actually acquired from West Africa. And today now they're supplying palm oil to Africa. So this is another example of a close bilateral business partnership between Indonesia and East Africa. All those, most of the non-Ugandan workforce that you see here are from Indonesia. They are working and they are developing these oil palm plantations. In Tanzania, again, Indonesians have stepped in to create fertilizer factories. The state-owned defense firm called Pindad is seeking to export some of its small arms hardware to Tanzania and Kenya. And the push has really come from the time when of President Widodo in 2017, and it's been taken forward step by step by successive Indonesian leaders. I attended the 2024 Indonesia-Africa Forum in Bali, and it's no longer seems to be, Indonesia is no longer, it's kind of shifted. Earlier it was all about the Afro-Asian solidarity because it was a proud host of the 1955 Bandung Conference. But today it seeks Indonesia is trying to demonstrate its development model. A lot of African countries are interested in how Indonesia is trying to develop its become a major EV battery producer using nickel, using its natural resources to climb the industrial value chain. And so what Indonesia is figuring out is that in terms of its structural conditions are so remarkably similar to many sub-Saharan African countries who have roughly the same kind of ambitions, that it can actually be seen and to be doing a more sort of a reliable and attractive partner. So that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to cultivate it slowly, not always very successfully, but Indonesia is certainly trying to build that Africa partnership much more deliberately than most other Southeast Asian countries. Here's a look at the 2024 Indonesia Africa Forum. By offering, this has worked. I mean, it's still early days to say whether or not this will work or not. But Indonesia is an interesting example of how a Southeast Asian country is cultivating its very strategically looking at its relationship with East Africa. Thailand, historically, this was focused largely in the public health domain and technical training, but now Thailand is one of the biggest exporters of rice. It's very easy. You go to a supermarket in many parts of Nairobi, or easy to find Thai rice. It's cheaper. It's more readily available than the local versions. So some 37% of its rice output of Thailand is shipped to Africa today. Kenya is the fourth largest producer, a buyer of Thai rice. And today, it exports roughly about $200 million a year. That's the kind of trade that's going on. What's interesting is that a lot of the hospitality industry is also finding room in Africa. So this photograph here is of Dusit Thani, a very good Thai hospitality chain. If I'm not mistaken, Dusit Thani is a part of the Thaksin Shinawatras, the former Prime Minister's business interest group, luxury hotels, which you can now find in many African capitals. This one is called Dusit Thani Princess in Nairobi, very new, very brand new. The other one that I stayed, not in East Africa, but that was in Egypt. So they are spreading, they're investing big time in Africa. So this shows you the complexity of economic relationships developing between Southeast Asia and Africa. But there have been some setbacks as well. So Air Asia from Malaysia, a low-cost carrier, started out with a lot of fanfare connecting Kuala Lumpur to Nairobi, but it shut down. So within a very short, less than a year, it turned out that the route was unviable, even though it looked attractive in the beginning. So that's one setback that happened. And in fact, that's one of the bugbears. Aviation connectivity between any part of Africa, particularly East Africa and Southeast Asia, is not that fantastic. Even though Ethiopian Airlines is flying, it pretty much has a monopoly on direct connections. So as a result, your typical airfare to Nairobi either from KL or from Singapore is relatively more expensive because there isn't that many choices. This one here is again a setback. Pertamina is a state-run oil and gas major, Indonesian major. It pulled out of the Suswa geothermal project in Kenya, 500 megawatts. This was a joint venture. Again, a major stake that was put in place but didn't work, so they have pulled out. So not everything has been smooth sailing as far as Southeast Asia and East Africa is concerned. Now the real footprint of Australia, no surprise, is mining. Australian mining firms have invested $60 billion across the continent, about 400 projects in 35 countries. That's the data that I have. Surely John will correct me if I'm wrong. And there's in East Africa too, one of the biggest ones is the Nyanzaga gold project. This is by Perseus Mining, an Australian firm. So this would be the single biggest mining sort of investment by an Australian firm in East Africa. There are many others, certainly one high-profile one is in Guinea, the Simandu project, but that's west. But we have focused here today on East Africa, so let me talk to you about that. So BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto also have, but they're much less invested in East Africa than other parts of the world. Foreign direct investments, Kenya again is the favorite destination for Australian investments going out. Interestingly, there's $35 million worth of Australian dollars worth of investments coming in from Kenya into Australia. I don't know what that is. Maybe John would have, David will have a better idea. That's almost half of what Australia is investing in Kenya. So I don't know where that $35 million is coming from and who is investing in what. Any thoughts, David? What could that possibly be? Ah, okay. Okay. Equity bank. Equity bank. Okay, okay. This looks at the trade figures for 2025. Again, you see Kenya is number one. Almost 60% of the trade is with Kenya. Again, it's largely in favor of Australia, but curiously, it's reverse with Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, Burundi, and Somalia. They maintain a trade surplus. Now, this is strange when you think about that 3 of these 5 countries are fragile, and with the exception of South Sudan, I mean, I can't possibly think of any commodity that could be of use to Australia, but who knows how that comes about. Maybe it's the diaspora doing something, right? Possible. Education spend, your favorite topic, David, again reveals some strange and bizarre and interesting trends, right? First, spending on education related activity by East Africans has outstripped all physical goods export and trade. But with the exception of Kenyans, the spending by others is rather modest. Just for sake of comparison, Malaysians alone spent more than 1 billion Australian dollars pursuing education in Australia in 2025. That is more than all of East Africa put together. So there is still a big gap. Top East African destinations where Australians love to travel. So there you go. But they also do in some of the more unexpected places. I don't know who these Australians are. I would love to meet them. $8 million on leisure in Somalia. There's a fantastic beach. It's called Lido in Mogadishu, if anyone wants to care to go. But I'm guessing not many Australians would be up for it. Surely they don't go there to surf. So then the only conclusion that these figures could possibly be represented by the spending by Somali diaspora when they go visit their families. The same must be for Ethiopia and Uganda as well. East Africans in Australia, this is the third point, which is they constitute a relatively minor proportion. Approximately 500,000 African-born people living in Australia. South Africans make up the majority, followed by the Egyptians. But more recently, I learned in June, there is a Perth lady called Salam Teganen. She is, forgive my accent, but she's an Ethiopian-born Kenyan who lives in Perth and was awarded for her work on as a nurse, as a medical practitioner, and she lives in Perth. So she was awarded this thing in Singapore. So they're making big contributions. And so here's a picture that emerges when we look at the very differences on how Southeast Asia and Australia are engaging with East Africa. So let's start with trade. One, Southeast Asia's trade with East Africa is much larger. Australia's is relatively modest. Investments, in the case of Southeast Asian countries, a lot more diversified in many other sectors. Australian investments concentrated in the mining and extractive industry. As a market, Southeast Asia is certainly larger, and Australia relatively smaller. African diaspora is much smaller in Southeast Asia. There are very few East Africans living there as compared to Australia. In terms of foreign policy, in Southeast Asian countries typically tend to de-emphasize or put economics way over things like human rights, China, security, and other factors. In the case of Australia, that may or may not necessarily be the case. I would think that in the past, certainly, some governments have taken up these issues much more, have given these issues much more significance than just trade and economy. export competitiveness. Certainly, Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia and others, a lot more competitive. Their products and services have applicability in markets like Sub-Saharan Africa, particularly East Africa. Australia, perhaps less so, high quality, but more expensive. So it might not necessarily find a ready market there. The development model, I just mentioned Indonesia. Some countries like Rwanda showcase and try to tell, try to see Singapore as a development model. In the case of Australia, I haven't heard anyone say that that's a model, but if you think about it, it could be. And the reason why I say that is one of the fine examples of how a resource-rich nation hasn't allowed, has created a diversified economy and has used it for human capital. So escape what we call is the resource curse. Education. Australia is far more desirable as a destination for education for almost all East Africans. With the exception of Singapore, less so. Connectivity, I guess air connectivity is poor in both cases. Getting a visa, most East Africans can come to a place like Singapore and get 8-day entry straight up. Entry visas in Australia is difficult. Travel, largely Southeast Asians go there for business. I'm guessing most Australians would be going there for leisure. Worldview, largely the same. We see each other as members of the global South in Southeast Asia and East Africa. Not the same for Australia. Racism, I leave that for you to judge. But that's basically how I drew the differences. So when you look at the map of the world, it doesn't take you long to notice that East Africa guards the western flank of the Indian Ocean. And this is where 40% of international trade, 70% of oil passes through. So it should be of strategic importance to Australia. And anything that happens in this region will affect. So this is just my view, and you might have yours. What should a trade-dependent country like Australia do if it wants to do more with East Africa, right? East Africa or Africa in general should not be seen just as a place of valuable natural resources, but a market worth investing in. It should not be seen just as a spectacular tourist destination, but a hub for innovation, technology, and talent. Emphasize trade more than aid. I guess that's beginning to happen. There's a demand from a lot of African countries to start to invest in processing more than just extracting. That's something that should be taken up seriously. Ease of visa would make a big difference. Partnership with Japan and India. So one of the reason I say that is if you believe that the risk premium or investing in place like Kenya or Tanzania is higher, go with partners that have already done so. So this is the model that I would urge Australian investors to look at what Japan is doing when it's trying to enter Africa. So it partners with companies like Indian companies, for example, to enter the market. And in business, put more emphasis on the foreign policy, make it more pragmatic, more business-like, and I guess it's entirely up to the Australian government to see how much more emphasis they want to put on democracy, things like democracy and human rights. But that's about it. So thank you all, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to address.
Thank you very much, Amit. Probably keep you up here, I think. I don't know where the camera's going to go. I'll stand near you so it captures both of us. But thank you for that, I guess, a tour, both economically and visually. It was great to see some familiar places and really shows the breadth of the work that you've done across multiple parts of the world. This is a really valuable discussion for us here in Australia because at the moment we currently have a parliamentary inquiry into Australia's own trade and investment relationships with the whole continent of Africa. So the comparative value that you bring to that conversation is really important. You are going to produce a sort of policy publication coming out of this visiting fellowship, so we'll try and get that to the parliamentary inquiry before they close. so that you can share some of the insights from the Southeast Asian example. So we will open to questions. I think we've got about 25 minutes or so. We've got some food and drinks up the back, but now's your chance to engage with Amit. So would anyone like to kick us off? Thanks. There's a microphone there as well.
Right at the beginning, Amit, you mentioned about carbon credit agreements between Singapore and East Africa. Could you expand a little bit on that?
So here's the thing, under the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, each country has given a commitment, the national commitment to drive down how much it will cut down carbon emissions. Part of that, industrialized countries have had to move away from using emission of fossil fuels. But there are some industries that will find it harder to decarbonize. And in that scheme, some have developed what is called the cap and trade mechanism, which is you can buy excess carbon credit from countries that are not producing their fair quota of permissible carbon. And so it becomes a tradable commodity. So the way that Singapore is thinking about is if it is able to create a market for carbon credits, but there it's very controversial though, and the reasons are very many. One is the quality of that carbon credit is under scrutiny. Many of these carbon credit that are available in the market haven't actually come out of real cuts in those carbons. So the integrity of that carbon credit is in question. So Singapore is trying to create a market that is of high integrity. It has taken a very conservative approach to introducing this. So in terms of integrity, quality, and the pricing, all those factors will matter. At the moment, you can buy a credit as cheap as $6 a ton. And so if you have the cost of carbon, which is so low, readily available, then the market doesn't take off. So it has to come up to a reasonable price level. So there are many factors, and not entirely everything of Singapore's or Africa's making it's a global thing. So we'll have to see how it all pans out.
Hi. You mentioned the displacement of people in Addis Ababa, I think it was. I work in agriculture, and you mentioned some agricultural products, but one of the things in East Africa is broadacre farming is very poor technology. I'm aware of two instances where Australians who are very good at broadacre farming are passing that knowledge on, but it's going to displace a lot of rural people. So the sovereign risk that if you get sufficient numbers of displaced people, you end up with revolutions. And of course, just recently, I think it was in Kenya, was the facility that the US was funding, and there was huge. I mean, that wasn't displacement, but that's a sort of political revolutionary action. So just wonder if you could talk about that potential.
No, I think some of those fears are overblown. Let me start by saying, on average, on a per hectare basis, the average use of fertilizers, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa is less than 8 kilograms. Right, this is maybe 1/16 what they should actually be having to improve just the yield, just by using, never mind the tools, just by using fertilizers. So that thing of getting displaced comes much later on. In fact, some of the carbon credit schemes that have been developed to preserve these mangroves, and they are said to have had displacement of local communities a lot more than improvement. I think most smallholders, governments, and farmers, and their associations would welcome high yield and Australian technology. One of the biggest challenges for African farming is not just growing, crop, but the 40% wastage that happens from farm to fork. Australia can teach. There's a lot of tech that you have here that can be transferable, adopted, and be used there. It'll bring down their import cost of their food. 30% of food they have to import. So it will be immensely useful.
Hi, my name is Piyush. I'm a professor of marketing here. And I've lived in Singapore and have lots of friends who live and work in Africa and all across Southeast Asia. I mean, the million-dollar question is, we know what the opportunity is. What, in your mind, is the biggest barrier? That's
Financing. So let me give you an example, and a concrete one. A typical small entrepreneur interested in entering let's say wants to try out his service or his goods in a place like Nairobi, goes to a bank, asks for a loan, and the bank either turns him away or charges a ridiculous sum of interest, which makes that entire project unbankable, unworkable. I think if there are proper credit facilities, your Exim Bank, for example, Export-Import Bank, can backstop, with guarantees and reduce that cost of trade will flourish. India has done that very, very successfully. Actually, India is a good case study where the Exim Bank of India, how it has helped grow India's trade with continental Africa from less than $40 billion to today crossing 160 billion in less than maybe 10 to 15 years. That's a good case study.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I'm Paul Loring. I don't know a great deal about this topic, so it's good to learn more, so thank you for that. But some concerns I have is that, what I've heard is that many African countries are still suffering from colonial debt. And as a consequence of that, they're still, their industry and their business is still focused on supporting the wealthy, mainly Western nations, rather than developing and building their own. So as a result of that, they are growing palm oil, but it's not for them. They may be exporting it to another African country, but that country is exporting a product made from palm oil to service the wealthy West. And yet, we see with so many African countries, the status of their employment, their education, their health, their housing, their transport, it still requires so much extra effort, and they're not able to be self-sufficient in this because their economy is supporting their colonial, loan-driven, wealthy Western nations. Am I still?
No, you're spot on.
Still accurate.
You're spot on. You're spot on. This is legacy. You're right. I guess it's a global financial architecture that is built. So structurally, the economy, the way it is done is that if African sovereign governments want to borrow to finance their own development, let's say they want to build bridges or canals or what have you, or even invest in their human capital, if they go to the international market, the premium that they have to then pay to these multilateral institutions or borrow from the commercial market around the world is 6 times more than what a country in Southeast Asia with equivalent fiscal management and principles would have to do. So it's unfair to them. And therefore, there is a clamor now under the Africa peer review mechanism, which is being led by a good friend of mine working under the African Union, is to bring that to light so that the big 4 agencies around the world that sort of calculate how much sovereign risk, Standard & Poor, Fitch and others, are put under the scanner because they've not invested enough in understanding the nuances of how hard many of the African countries have gone, how far they have gone in reforming their systems. And so the premium that they're paying is unfair, so which is why they keep getting in that cycle. Markets in Africa are very fragmented, which is why there is this move towards Africa Continental Free Trade Area. If you become a bigger market, you're able to get financing for a lot of your development needs it becomes more viable. And also their own, they sit on something like $4 trillion worth of sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and their own financial system, which has parked its money overseas because that gets returned. There's no pipeline of projects or conceivable venue for these sovereign wealth funds to invest at home. So it's structural issues. It'll have to be handled, step by step. But it's moving in that direction now. So Africa will have its own credit rating agency by next year, very soon.
So shouldn't then, you gave us a list of things that Australia ought to be doing. So oughtn't this be the top of the list, that they should actually be,
Could be.
rather than continue to exploit it by
Spot on.
investing $50 billion in mining, they should actually be
Spot on. So you exactly
building
right.
those economies rather than
Exactly right. So Australia's lessons, how it used its natural wealth into investing at home. Maybe it built a financial capital market, a liquid, deep financial capital markets. A lot of Africa needs help with that, because except for South Africa, Johannesburg, the other 8 or 10 stock exchanges are too small, too illiquid. There's nothing happening. So I think that could be a good starting point too. Yeah.
If I could just follow on from that, I mean, to me, it seems that the fundamental issue here is governance, because people are just as capable of colonising themselves. And you mentioned the billionaire Kenyan, I think.
Yeah.
So, whether it's external people or internal people, taking advantage, it's human nature after all. So it really comes down to rule of law and governance.
Of course.
And,
All those things.
and you mentioned
All those
attitudes to hate human rights and so forth. And I think there is a link there too.
Yeah. I mean, sure. I mean, ultimately, capital goes where there's some degree of predictability, governance, rule of law, and so those are the essentials. But that alone shouldn't be. Africa is not alone in grappling with these issues. Southeast Asia grew fastest when it was still figuring out. Its own. I mean, you reckon corruption in places like Indonesia is any better? The answer is no. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, sure.
Tell me about China.
What about it?
I gather it's a country in Asia. Something about the Chinese role in East Africa?
Huge.
Yeah, that's what I gathered, but can you tell me a bit more than that?
Oh boy, okay. China, about $698 billion worth of trade now. No country comes anywhere close to its economic partnership with Africa as China does today. Nearly all African states, with the exception of Eswatini, have proper diplomatic relations with China. 800,000 to 600,000 students, African students, go to China on scholarships every year. Learn perfect Mandarin, come back home. The number of Chinese that have established their businesses in Africa, no one knows a true picture, but there are hundreds and thousands of them. One of the biggest lenders, that lending peaked, however, in 2016. Since then, it's been steadily going down, unlike what the Western press might want you to believe. In terms of debt, Angola has the largest chunk of debt that is there. It's also most dependent on its oil export from one country, which is China. Most African countries, their debt problem has more to do with commercial borrowing than anything else, not so much with China. So China does an interesting model, and the way they push it, they package everything together. The starting point is, what do you need first? And then we go down the ladder from there on. And once they have signed on to an agreement, they come with the technical expertise, with the banking and finance, the engineers, so everything from execution. So it just makes it so much more easier for a lot of African countries to sign on that kind of a deal, and with less baggage that is politically risky for the leader of the day. It could be a democracy or a non-democracy. They don't particularly care that much. What it has done, though, had it not been for the Chinese, there is no way the mobile revolution could have taken off in Africa or Asia, for that matter. The mobile revolution. So, the digital. Yeah. There's no way it could have happened, simply because just by the sheer volume of what they produce, they bring down the cost and make it accessible for ordinary folks to buy. Most of the countries now, except for two maybe African countries, with those exceptions, most of their digital infrastructure is now built upon Huawei. There used to be a time when Siemens used to be a thing there, not anymore. Right? There's a reason, because it's high tech, low cost, and you have service delivery that's dependable. So any upgrades they can do. The Chinese are also responsible for some sort of low light manufacturing in Africa. So that's happening already, particularly in East Africa. You can see Chinese investments going into light manufacturing and so on. So I would say, on balance, the role is positive. And I think, not me, but you should ask ordinary Africans what do they feel about this. It's a mixed bag, but on balance, it's positive.
Yeah, just digressing a bit. We've looked at structural issues, institutional roles, governments, etc. How about the people in Africa? And you touched upon it briefly. Is there an entrepreneurial sort of animal spirit that
absolutely.
you see? Any major economic?
Absolutely. So 70% of sub-Saharan African economy is informal. Informal economy runs on the spirit of entrepreneurs. And interestingly, it's the only continent in the world, this is something that very few people know, where the vast majority of enterprises are in the hands of women. Women run 70 to 80% of enterprises right across the board. And that's a remarkable testimony to the power of women in Africa. So they not only run their household, but they also run the economy. There is this legendary story of Mama Benz, which comes from West Africa, Benin. Now these Mama Benz are female entrepreneurs back in the 80s. They used to do textiles, and the quality of textiles was so big that they became big exporters of, and they became extremely wealthy because Benin's textile was exported to Nigeria and all over the region. These women, they became so wealthy, they became a political force in the 80s, and they used to be called Mama Benz because the favorite thing they used to have is a Benz, Mercedes-Benz. They used to be seen to be being driven around, and their husbands used to work for them. They used to be employed by they used to work for their wives. So that's China put a stop to this. Once China started to enter textile, and because the entry barriers are so low, China has finished off a lot of this domestic textile industry. And, sadly, that's competitive. Yeah. It is a cultural thing, for sure, absolutely. Mama Africa is a thing.
Can I just squeeze another small question?
Yeah.
African expats, are they
Huge.
like they've done in China?
Diaspora.
The Chinese expats have fueled that economy.
So the remittance money that is going back is now a big contributor to places like Kenya, Somalia. Somali diaspora is doing so much in Somalia. All that thing, rooftop solar, these diaspora Somalis are responsible for that, and many other parts of the world. Egyptians are well known, but that's not technically. If we stick to just East Africa, then yeah. Oh yeah. I had the figures how much remittance goes each year. I don't have it on top of my mind right now. Again, 100 billion. There you go. So, but again, remittance is a problem because if it's coming from Europe or from Australia, the cost of remitting is much higher for a lot of African diaspora. That needs to. So this is where Australia can contribute a lot to just reduce the cost of finance.
Thank you, Jane, for Amit, for some very useful information. A sort of a provocative question, if you don't mind.
Please.
You mentioned the irony of the fact that Indonesia and Malaysia are exporting so much palm oil to East Africa, where, in fact, the industry began.
Yeah, no, it began in West Africa, but they learned it from Africa, and now they're exporting back to.
Well, now that they've solved the tsetse fly problem by chopping down all the forests, would there not be some benefit to the globe if they were to reinstate an indigenous industry by restoring those native forests and creating really valuable carbon credits?
I couldn't agree with you more. There certainly is massive room for that. Deforestation is taking place at an alarming clip in East Africa, certainly. In places like the Horn of Africa, indigenous fauna has all but disappeared because they have this habit of eating khat. Khat has wiped out the indigenous fauna. There are some shining examples, though. Gabon is a net carbon credit country. They've preserved 80% of their forest is protected, despite changing governments and so on. Some revival in places like Madagascar that you're beginning to see. But on the whole, I would say the story is not very cheerful. The deforestation is real and it's continuing apace. And agribusiness has a lot to do with this, sadly. What's that? Costa Rica. Yes, Gabon, you could say, is the Costa Rica equivalent. Yes, yes.
What's making it attractive for them to?
No, they just had a, I mean, it's a national thing. First of all, their population is small, and a large part of the country is uninhabited, so easier for them to institute these things. Also, they've had, I mean, for whatever, the leadership has believed in protecting its natural forests, so that has worked for them.
I mean, it all comes down to economics at the end of the day, and the problem is that a lot of people call things resources. And I'm a biologist by training, so a lot of people say, "Oh, there's all these resources there," but they're not economic resources unless there's a demand. So the best thing people can do to give natural forests, for example, and biodiversity economic value is to discover things in those forests that have real economic demand, not potential. That's the key to it.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Is there one last one? Anyone? Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a particular interest in Nairobi, but they're much further south than you. Is there a relationship with them as well?
Say that again, please. One more
Is there a
time.
relationship with Nairobi and East Africa?
Nairobi in East Africa? Nairobi is in East Africa.
Nairobi is a very highly populated country, is it not?
Have I heard him right?
Nairobi.
Oh, sorry, Nigeria.
Nigeria, right, Nigeria, right. Nigeria, yes, it's okay. Aliko Dangote, one of the most respected and wealthiest African, it's the wealthiest African, wealthiest black man, I suppose, in the world today, has recently announced the establishment of a 600,000 barrel refinery in the port of Lamu, near Lamu, which is in Kenya. So he's investing huge. He's got the buy-in from the political leadership of Kenya. At some point in time, Tanzania was also pitching for it. So that's one. Nigerian music is now popular in East Africa. So if you go to pubs in Nairobi, you don't hear Kenyan music anymore. You hear Nigerian so these stars are huge in East Africa. And there's travel between the two, not in huge numbers, but yeah, that's beginning to happen.
Great. Okay, we will leave it there this time. Firstly, thank you to all of you for attending and for the questions, the engagement. It's a small crowd, but sometimes a small crowd is a better crowd because it's more engaged. So appreciate you coming down on a Friday evening. We were clashing with the Western Derby as well, so that was always a challenge. But thank you very much to you, Amit, for a really wonderful expose on trade relations that are currently happening, but also the potential and the role for Australia. We have just had the opening of an East Africa-Australia Chamber of Commerce in the last couple of weeks, which might be a symbol of the growing interest in these relations. So again, it's something that is a conversation that we've certainly been trying to push here from Perth. There is a bit more interest in Africa from Perth. One of the challenges we face is that the rest of the country is on the other side of Australia, looking towards the Pacific. So pulling the government west is one of the things we try and do here with the centre. We do have a number of brilliant PhD students who are looking at many of the aspects that you touched on across diaspora, remittances, China-Africa relations, the displacement of populations due to infrastructure development. So there is a growing body of expertise now in Australia on many of the issues you've developed. But bringing the perspective from Southeast Asia, I think, is quite a unique one for us here. We hear a lot about Southeast Asia and Australia. We don't hear a lot about Africa, but thinking about these kind of triangles across the Indian Ocean is a new way for us to think through our position in the world and some of the possibilities that can come with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There's an interesting legend, and it's true, it's historically true. In the 6th century, Srivijaya Empire in Java, there's a ship that was sailing, not one, but apparently an armada of trading ship, lost its way and crashed in what is present-day Madagascar. And their descendants today are the Malagasy, which is why the language Malagasy is 80% similar to Bahasa. And they look like Indonesians. Their food habits is very much like Javanese. It's just remarkable. It's a historical accident that brings the two together.
Thank you. So please join me in thanking Amit. And before we invite you to come and have some refreshments, we will have our next Curtin Corner in 2 weeks' time on the Friday the 7th of August. We'll let you know the venue, but we will be having another guest speaker, Dr. Chipo Dendere from Wellesley College in the United States, and she'll be launching her new book on authoritarianism and voter displacement in Zimbabwe, but looking more broadly at questions of authoritarianism and voters. So please look out for the information on that one, and you're very welcome to come back and join us there. But for now, we invite you to come up to the back of the room and share some refreshments with us. Thank you very much.